In my own house, a bad feeling ambushed me so suddenly it felt physical. I pretended I was going away on vacation, loaded up my SUV, waved to my son and daughter-in-law, and drove off as if I were leaving Phoenix for 2 quiet weeks. Instead, I parked miles away, doubled back, let myself into the vacant house across from mine, and started watching my own life from a distance. That was when my elderly neighbor opened the door, took my hand with surprising strength, and leaned close to whisper in my ear, "At midnight you'll see everything, and then you'll understand." When midnight finally came, the truth hit me with such brutal clarity that my world flipped upside down, and I actually blacked out for a second. Before I get there, you know the drill. Make sure you're subscribed and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. That afternoon clung to my shirt like a second skin as I pushed open the door to my study. My fingers reached automatically for the light switch and stopped halfway, suspended in midair. Something was wrong. Nothing dramatic. No overturned furniture, no broken glass. But after 40 years of living in this house in Phoenix, 30 of them as a trial judge at the State Superior Court, I knew every angle, every shadow, every detail of that room. The manila folders on my desk were a fraction of an inch to the left of where I had left them. The chair was at a slightly different angle. The private metal file cabinet, my file cabinet, had fresh scratches around the lock. My heart slammed against my ribs. I set my water bottle on the desk with exaggerated care, fighting the urge to rush straight at everything, rip drawers open, tear the room apart. Instead, I walked slowly around the desk, forcing my eyes to catalog every small change. The folder with the deed to the house, which I always left neatly squared and facing me, now sat askew. The tax documents I kept in strict chronological order were jumbled. Someone had gone through those papers methodically, trying to put everything back almost exactly where it had been. Almost, but not quite. I knelt beside the cabinet, my knees protesting. The lock was ringed with tiny scratches, the crude work of someone using a dinner knife or a letter opener instead of proper tools. I opened the drawer. Everything was still there, but in the wrong order. My will lay under the insurance policies instead of on top. The financial statements had fat thumbprints smudged into the margins. For a moment I tried to convince myself this might have been me, that I had absent-mindedly shuffled things and forgotten. After all, I'm 67. But even as the thought formed, I rejected it. 3 decades on the bench had taught me to trust evidence more than convenient explanations. My mind may be aging, but it is not falling apart. Not yet. I stood in the silence of my study, holding a folder marked by someone else's fingerprints, and felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't panic. It was colder than that. It was the same instinct that had helped me spot lying witnesses, detect forged documents, cut through rehearsed testimonies. That instinct was screaming now. The only question was, who? Dinner answered that, without saying a word. I took my usual place at the head of the table. My son David sat to my right, his wife Laura across from him. The chicken was overcooked. Laura had never quite mastered my late wife's recipes, but I carved it with careful precision and chewed slowly while they made small talk about their day. Then David cleared his throat. "Dad, I was thinking, have you updated your will lately? I just want to be sure everything's properly organized." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I set it down with a controlled gesture. The click of metal on porcelain sounded louder than it should have. I looked at my son, really looked at him. His eyes flicked toward Laura and back to me too quickly. "Why are you asking?" I said without looking away. "No reason, just planning ahead, you know. At your age. At your age." I let the words float in the air between us and watched color creep up his neck. "Right," I said. Laura leaned forward. She smiled warmly, but her eyes were sharp. "Henry, we just want what's best for you. Having everything clearly documented protects everyone. It avoids confusion later on." I took a sip of water to buy time and study her. She was better at hiding her nerves than David, I'll give her that. But I'd spent 30 years reading body language in courtrooms. Her left hand gripped the fork too tightly, the tendons on the back of her hand standing out like wires. "Confusion about exactly what?" I asked. She blinked and recovered quickly. "You know, legal things. David worries about you living alone in such a big house." "Ah, of course." I didn't pose it as a question. I picked my fork back up and continued eating, letting them interpret my silence however they wished. The rest of dinner dragged. I pretended to watch the evening news while actually studying their reflections in the dark window behind the television. They sat together on the couch, heads close, voices low. Laura put a hand on David's arm, a gesture that could have been comfort or conspiracy. He nodded, glanced toward me, and looked away quickly, thinking I hadn't noticed. They believed I only saw the screen. They had no idea I was building a case. That night I lay awake staring at the slow rotation of the ceiling fan, unable to sleep. My son, my own son, the boy I had raised, whose law degree I paid for, whose wedding I celebrated with pride, was now sitting in my living room planning to have me declared incompetent so he could seize my assets. The house alone was worth over $1 million in the Phoenix market. My life insurance policy added another $500,000. Retirement accounts, investments, a piece of land up near Flagstaff that my father left me, plenty of motivation for someone who lacked patience. Before dawn, I was already up, moving through the house like a ghost. The mail sat in its usual place by the front door. David must have brought it in the afternoon before. I went through the stack carefully. 3 envelopes had been opened and clumsily resealed. 2 letters from the state tax office I had been expecting for days were nowhere to be found. I took out my phone and opened the Postal Service tracking app. Both letters showed as delivered 3 days earlier. My hands shook as I photographed the tampered envelopes. Then I forced myself to calm down and examine them like evidence. No room for emotion, only observation and planning. Back in my study, I stood in front of the violated file cabinet and let myself feel rage for a moment. Then I locked it away, deep down, where it wouldn't interfere with clear thinking. 30 years of watching people lie had taught me something. Everyone has a tell. David's had always been in his eyes. That night, he hadn't been able to hold my gaze for more than 3 seconds. The pieces started locking into place in my mind like an indictment. Motive, money, opportunity, living under my roof. The method was still unknown, but it was obvious they had begun gathering information and building an advantage, convinced I was just a tired old man who wouldn't notice his life being stolen out from under him. I sank into my desk chair and spoke softly into the empty room. They think I'm just a tired old man. They're about to learn what 3 decades in a courtroom really teaches you: how to read evidence, how to build a case, and how to strike when they least expect it. The plan began to form. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. First, I needed information. To get information, I needed to become invisible. They had to believe they'd already won, that I was out of the way, that they were free to act. They wanted me to disappear. Fine, I would disappear, but not the way they imagined. I pulled out a pad and started making lists. Supplies I'd need, places I could watch from, people who owed me favors. The machinery of my counterattack began to click together with the same precision I had once used to dismantle defense strategies at trial. By the time the desert sun rose and threw long shadows across my study floor, I knew exactly what I was going to do. They had opened a door into the dark, thinking they would find a helpless old man on the other side. Instead, they were going to meet a judge, and this time I wouldn't be bound by rules of procedure or evidence. This time, the verdict would be mine alone. I spent 2 days planning, 2 days playing the part of a distracted retiree while I made careful preparations. Now, sitting at the breakfast table with David and Laura, I was ready to spring the trap. I spread butter on my toast with slow, casual strokes, took a measured sip of coffee, and set the mug back down with apparent carelessness. "I've been thinking about that trip to the Grand Canyon we always talked about," I said. "I'm going to do it. 2 weeks, starting today." David's fork clattered against his plate. "Today? That's really sudden." I shrugged as I reached for the jam. "I'm retired. No time like the present. Your mother always wanted to see it. I figured it's about time I did it for her." The emotion in that last sentence was calculated to the millimeter, true enough to sound sincere, strategic enough to deflect suspicion. I watched them process the news. Their exchanged glance was quick, but loaded. Laura recovered first, leaning toward me with an obviously manufactured warmth. "That's wonderful, Henry. You deserve a break. Don't worry about anything here. Don't worry about anything here." Her words hung in the air like a confession. I nodded slowly, looking down at my plate as if thinking about routes instead of the way her face already lit up with plans. I could see it in the way her fingers drummed once on the table, a little burst of impatience she barely managed to suppress. "Are you sure you can handle the drive alone?" David asked, trying to sound concerned. "It's a long trip for—" He stopped halfway, realizing the hole he was about to dig. "For someone my age." I let a sharp edge cut into my voice. I saw him flinch. "I didn't mean—" "I know you didn't," I said, then softened my tone to give him an exit. "I'll be fine. I've been driving these highways for 40 years. The relief on his face was painful to see. My own son, relieved I wouldn't make things difficult, grateful for the chance to steal from me. I spent the morning moving around the house with deliberate energy, playing the role of the excited traveler, hiking boots from the closet, camera gear, tourist maps of the canyon spread across the dining table, everything chosen for plausibility. Between the tourist items I slipped in other things, solid binoculars with night vision, an old case notebook still mostly blank, a small digital camera, tools of investigation disguised as leisure. Around lunchtime I spread the map out and traced the route with my finger while they pretended interest. "I'll take the highway north. I'll probably stop in the mountains the first night, then head onto the canyon." "Sounds perfect," Laura said, following my finger with her eyes, though she wasn't looking at the route at all. She was watching my gestures, calculating how long I'd be gone. 2 weeks should be enough, I added. "Maybe I'll stay longer if the weather's good. It's been so long since I've been anywhere without responsibilities." "Take all the time you need," David blurted, a little too quickly, a little too eager. The afternoon heat was brutal when I started loading the SUV. Over 108 degrees, that kind of Phoenix summer where the air itself seems to shimmer. I moved slowly, partly for effect, partly because my back complained. A cooler with ice and water, a folding chair, a sleeping bag I wasn't actually going to use, but that they would expect to see. David came out to help with the heavy things. I led him, watching his tense movements split between guilt and anticipation. When we finished, I turned to him. He stepped in to hug me, and I returned the embrace, feeling the stiffness in his shoulders. "Take care of everything here," I said quietly, almost into his shoulder. "We will, Dad. We will." Laura waited at the door. I accepted her kiss on the cheek. Her perfume was expensive, sharper and more recent than the one I remembered. Probably bought with money they didn't have yet, but were already counting. The thought was bitter, but I kept my face neutral, even cordial. "Enjoy it, Henry. You've earned this trip." I climbed into the SUV and started the engine. They stood on the porch waving, smiles too wide, enthusiasm too bright. As I pulled away, I watched them in the rearview mirror. The moment they thought I could no longer see them, their faces changed. David slipped an arm around Laura's waist. She said something that made him laugh. They were celebrating. About 20 miles east, not north, a desert motel sat by the highway, the kind of place that takes cash and asks no questions. I checked in under a false name, James Monroe, the name of a defendant I'd once acquitted who'd been dead for years, but whose details I still remembered. The clerk barely glanced at me. The room was exactly what I expected. Thin carpet, rattling air conditioner, television bolted to the dresser. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for dark. 3 hours. I ate a sandwich I'd brought with me. I drank water. I tried to nap, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was already back at my house, imagining what they might be doing. Had they started already? Were they in my study at that very moment, going through everything without caution? The sun finally sank behind the desert horizon around 7:30, painting the sky orange and purple. I waited 2 more hours until the darkness was complete. Then I drove back by another route, side streets I knew after decades in the neighborhood. I parked 3 blocks away under the shadow of a eucalyptus tree and walked through the warm night. My knees complained. I ignored them. The house across from mine had been vacant and for sale for 6 months. I'd passed it dozens of times. I had seen the realtor's lockbox on the door and memorized the code printed on a sign the agent once left too close to the sidewalk. 4-7-3-2. My fingers found the numbers in the dark and the box clicked open. Inside, the key waited. The house smelled of dust and abandonment, that particular emptiness of a place waiting to become someone's home. I moved without turning on lights, letting my eyes adjust and finding the front bedroom that looked directly onto my facade. Every window in my house blazed with light, both cars in the driveway. I unfolded the chair, set it by the big front window, took out the binoculars, and raised them. There they were. Through the living room window I saw David pacing. Laura sat on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, waving her free hand while she coordinated something with someone. My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I felt the same cold clarity that used to come in the middle of complex trials when all the pieces finally clicked. The transformation was complete. I was no longer the victim, the target they pushed and maneuvered. I was the hunter, and they had no idea I was watching. I adjusted the focus and settled in for a long night. I'd spent 30 years looking down at criminals from the bench, separating truth from lies, justice from manipulation. I'd never imagined I'd one day be watching them from a vacant house across from my own, even less that one of them would be my son. But there he was. Whatever they thought they could do while I was away, I would see every move, hear every word, document every crime. They wanted to erase me from my own life. Fine. I would let them write out the whole story, and then I would show them what happens when you try to trick a judge. 3 days of surveillance took their toll. Empty coffee cups lined along the sill, fast food wrappers filling a bag, my back twisted into knots from the folding chair, my eyes burning from hours behind binoculars. But my mind stayed sharp. I logged every visit, every light turning on or off, every movement in those windows. Even so, it wasn't enough. David and Laura moved through my house with growing confidence, but whatever they were planning stayed just out of my reach. Then I heard footsteps on the porch of the vacant house. My hand flew to my phone, ready to call the police and justify my presence before anyone else could question it. The door opened slowly. I turned, rehearsed excuses on my tongue, and froze. In the doorway stood Margaret Davis, my neighbor of a lifetime. Her small figure was outlined by the afternoon sun. She wore a cream cardigan despite the heat, sensible shoes, silver hair in a bun. But what stopped me wasn't her appearance. It was her expression. No surprise, no confusion, only calm recognition. "I've been watching you watch them, Henry," she said. My throat tightened. "Mrs. Davis, what are you doing here?" She stepped in and closed the door with the ease of someone who had done it before. "The same thing you are, trying to find the truth. I don't understand." The denial came automatically, a judge's reflex. Never confirm what you're not obligated to confirm. She moved to the window, took a place beside me, and pointed a thin finger at my house. "That window, 2nd floor. From there I saw Laura taking pictures on Tuesday, room by room, very thorough." My grip tightened around the binoculars. "You've been watching my house?" "I've been watching your house for 40 years, Henry. We've been neighbors that long." She pulled a small notebook from her cardigan pocket and opened it. Her fine handwriting filled the pages, dates, times. "On Tuesday, a man came, wearing a suit, leather briefcase. He stayed 40 minutes. David let him in." I leaned closer despite myself. "How old did he seem? What did he look like?" 40-ish maybe. Dark hair, professional. He came back Thursday morning. David let him in both times. You're sure? Her eyes met mine, clear and alert. I may be old, but I see just fine. I stepped back from the window, trying to regain control. This isn't your business. It's my family. Your family is robbing you right in front of your face, she interrupted, voice as neutral as a medical diagnosis. That concerns all of us. Her words fell like a verdict I'd been avoiding for days. You can't know that. Oh no? She pointed at my improvised surveillance post, binoculars, notebook, chair. Then why are you hiding in an empty house staring at your own? Silence stretched. A car passed outside. The air conditioner rattled. Margaret turned back to my house. They think you're far away. They're getting careless. Tonight, they'll make their move. How can you be so sure? She tapped her notebook with one finger. Patterns. Tuesday and Thursday, the man with the briefcase came during the day. Yesterday after dark, David took boxes out to the garage. They're building towards something. And you think it'll be tonight? I know it will be tonight, she said, looking straight at me. She reached out, took my hand with surprising strength and leaned closer. At midnight, you'll see everything and then you'll understand. Trust me. Trust. The word felt strange. I'd spent 3 days alone with my suspicions, my shame, my anger. Sharing any of that felt impossible. This was my family, my failure, my battle. But she was already pulling a thermos from a canvas bag I hadn't noticed, along with 2 cups and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, setting everything by my chair as if we had planned this alliance from the start. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice lower than I intended. She paused, cup halfway to her lips. When she spoke, her voice carried a new weight. Because I watched my own daughter steal from me before she died. I did nothing. I'm not going to watch the same thing happen again and stay silent. Something loosened in my chest. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be ready. She handed me a cup of coffee. When midnight comes, you'll need to see everything clearly. Both of us will. I accepted the coffee and returned to my seat by the window. She dragged over another folding chair she'd already placed in the room and sat beside me. We watched in silence as afternoon turned to night. The sky over Phoenix faded from orange to purple to deep, almost black blue. Lights flicked on across the neighborhood. My house shone brighter than the others, every window lit. Through the glass, I saw David moving back and forth across the living room. Laura was still on the phone, wide gestures, clearly coordinating something. The pieces were aligning. Margaret poured more coffee and offered me another sandwich. I ate without tasting it, my eyes locked on those windows. The hours crawled. 10 o'clock, 11. The neighborhood slowly went dark, house by house, until everything lay in shadow, except my house. David and Laura were still awake, moving from room to room, checking phones, peering through curtains, waiting. At 11:40, Margaret touched my arm. Almost time. My heart pounded. 3 days of watching, and finally the moment was coming. What was I going to see? How far did their plan go? How deep ran my own son's betrayal? The questions circled like vultures. At 11:47, headlights washed across the street. Margaret gripped my arm. "They're here," she whispered. A black sedan crept down the block and turned into my driveway. The engine cut off. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, wearing a suit at that hour, leather briefcase in his right hand. He checked his watch, scanned the street with the wary look of someone aware that a midnight appointment is not quite normal. "That's him," Margaret murmured. "Luke Carter." I lowered the binoculars a moment to stare at her. "You're sure?" "I looked him up after his second visit," she explained. "Luke Carter, real estate consultant." The name filed itself away in my mind like a case caption. Luke Carter, real estate, midnight appointment. "Smart," I said, raising my phone to photograph the license plate. Margaret wrote the number in her notebook without my asking. A wordless partnership had formed. I captured images, she captured details, both of us precise. My front door opened before Carter reached the porch. David must have been watching from inside. They exchanged a few words I couldn't make out from that distance, short syllables, nods. No handshake. This was business, not a social call. David stepped aside. Carter went in. The door closed. Through the living room window, I saw 3 figures moving toward the dining room. Carter set his briefcase on the table. David pulled out chairs. Laura appeared from the direction of my study, and my stomach clenched. She was carrying the red folder. "That folder," I said, my voice hollow. "That one was in my safe." "What's in it?" Margaret whispered. "The deed to the house, my original will, financial documents, everything they'd need to strip you of everything," she finished. I took photos. The distance blurred some, and the glass added reflections, but many came out clear enough. Carter seated at the head of my table, David to his right, shoulders hunched with tension, Laura spreading out my private papers with clinical efficiency. It was happening in my house, at my table, with my documents. Margaret wrote non-stop. 2352. 3 people visible. Multiple documents on dining table. Appearance of business meeting. Her years as a nurse showed in the clinical precision of her notes. Just facts, no flourishes. Through the binoculars, I watched Carter hold documents up to the light, checking watermarks, signatures, seals, the practiced eye of a professional who knew what genuine paperwork should look like. That rigor should have comforted me. Instead, it terrified me. If the forgery passed his trained inspection, undoing it later would be much harder. David's body language read like a textbook on guilt. He shifted constantly, drummed his fingers on the table edge, avoided looking at Carter or Laura for long, yet never stood up, never tried to stop anything. He just sat there, complicit, soaking in his own shame. Laura, by contrast, was still and composed, self-assured. Each time Carter asked a question, she answered with minimal motion, a small nod or measured gesture, the economy of someone convinced there are no holes in her story. She believed this would work, that they had covered every angle, that I would never know or never be able to stop them. The meeting stretched on. 20 minutes, 30, 40. My legs went numb from sitting so still. My shoulder ached from holding the phone, but I didn't move. Every second was real-time evidence. At one point, they slid papers to the far side of the table. David signed something, then Laura. Pens glided over pages I couldn't make out, but I photographed every gesture, time-stamped proof of signatures, agreements, fraud, because that's what it was. I had not signed anything or authorized anyone. Any signature with my name on those papers had to be false. Carter gathered the documents into his briefcase, stood, and extended his hand. David shook it. Then Laura. Transaction concluded to everyone's satisfaction. Laura disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a bottle and 3 glasses. Even from that distance, I recognized the shape of a champagne bottle. She poured with theatrical flair, handed each of them a glass. They raised them together. Toasting to what? To stealing my life, to their own cleverness, to the money they thought they'd have in their hands soon. I lowered the phone. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a fury I struggled to contain. Every instinct screamed at me to cross the street, kick the door in, and confront them with their betrayal. But 3 decades on the bench had taught me something else. Emotional outbursts are dismissed. Evidence convicts. The only thing that mattered was to keep documenting. "Keep recording," Margaret whispered. "Evidence, not emotion." I lifted the phone again and captured the toast, the smiles. Carter laughing at something David said, the easy comfort of people who believe no one is watching. At 12:45, Carter set down his glass. The evening's work was done. They moved toward the door and out of my line of sight inside. Margaret slid quietly to the front window of the vacant house and opened it a few inches. Warm June air flowed in, smelling of hot asphalt and desert dust. My front door opened. They stepped out onto the porch, first Carter, briefcase in hand, then David and Laura. The porch light bathed them as if on a stage. In the stillness of the neighborhood, their voices carried cleanly. If the power of attorney checks out as legitimate, we'll close on July 15th, Carter said, brisk and professional. The buyers are offering $650,000 in cash. His words hit me like the reading of a sentence. Power of attorney, closing date, cash payment. They weren't just planning, they were executing. It's legitimate, David replied, trying to sound confident and barely missing desperation. My dad signed it months ago. The lie, pure absolute lie. I had never signed any power of attorney then or ever. The document had to be forged. I'll still need to verify with the county recorder's office, Carter added, answering the same question I was asking myself. But everything's in motion, everything's in order. Laura stepped in with smooth assurance. We've been planning this for months, carefully. Carefully. The word echoed in my head. While I strolled the neighborhood, reading in my armchair, trusting them, they were planning carefully, step by step. They shook hands. Carter walked to his car and drove away. David and Laura lingered on the porch. Watching the taillights disappear, David said something too low to catch. Laura laughed, a clear, musical, triumphant sound. They went back inside. The living room lights went out. For them, the night's work was finished. For me, it had just begun. The block fell silent again, but inside my head there would be no more silence. I stood by the window, phone in hand, photos stored, Margaret's notebook full. He said I signed months ago, I murmured. I didn't sign anything. Forgery, Margaret asked. It has to be. The question is how good it is. What are you going to do? She asked. I felt the last traces of shock drain away, leaving only cold certainty. Let them think they're winning, then show them what happens when you underestimate a judge. The headlights rolling down the street at 11:47 burned into my memory. For days afterward, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black sedan creeping forward, that door opening, Carter checking his watch. I remembered it almost frame by frame, the red folder in Laura's hands, David's shaky signature, champagne glasses rising above my table, the words power of attorney and $650,000 hanging in the air. Thinking about it no longer sent me into panic. It pulled me into the focused state I used to enter while reviewing a complex case file. I had seen enough to understand the plan, but I still lacked the central piece, the forged document itself. To get that, I would have to enter my own house while they were gone. So I waited. 3 more days watching their routines from the empty house. David left for his downtown office every weekday at 8:30. Laura went shopping at the mall on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She usually took about 2 hours to get back. That Thursday, July 7th, was my window. I parked 2 blocks away, put on a cap and sunglasses, and watched. At 8:27, David's silver sedan backed out of the driveway and headed toward the freeway. 40 minutes later, Laura's black SUV followed. I waited 10 more minutes in case either came back for something forgotten. Then I started the engine again, pulled forward, and parked right in front of my house, where I had always parked. My key slid into the lock and turned smoothly. My house, my door, and still my hands shook as I pushed it open. Inside, the air conditioner hummed. The television murmured in the living room, left on to simulate someone being home. I stood in the entryway, and the feeling of being an intruder in my own home hardened something inside me. The guest room, my old spare bedroom, had become David's temporary office. I'd watched him working there from across the street. I opened the door. The desk was covered in the usual chaos of a modern office: laptop, papers, a notepad stained with coffee rings. I opened the drawers one by one: bank statements, client files, insurance papers. At the bottom of the lowest drawer I found what I'd come for, the red folder from the midnight meeting. It wasn't even locked away, just buried under manila envelopes, as if they already felt so safe they didn't need to hide it any better. Arrogance clenched my jaw. I spread the contents across the desk. The power of attorney was dated May 20th. At the bottom, my signature. or almost. Someone had studied my handwriting closely. The stroke was very similar, but the pressure points were off. The loop in the L of Lawson wasn't quite mine, and most telling of all, the ink seemed newer than the paper. Almost, I murmured, taking photos from different angles, but the way I make that L is different, and the date, the ink betrays you. It was a sloppy job, likely pulled from some shady website promising perfect signatures for delicate paperwork. They were counting on the idea that if I protested, they could claim I was senile and simply didn't remember signing. It wasn't going to work, not with the evidence I was collecting. I photographed every page, the power of attorney, the preliminary sales contract with the buyer, Richard Torres from California. Closing date, July 18th, not the 15th Carter had mentioned. 3 days of wiggle room. Price, $650,000 in cash. As I was about to put everything back, a few printed pages slid out from between two folders. I almost missed them. Emails. The first line froze me. Mark, when the sale closes, I'll have my half, $25,000. Enough to start over. I stood reading, phone forgotten in my hand. The messages were from Laura to a man in Los Angeles, plans stripped of any softening language. After the sale, she'd take the kids, leave David, and move in with this Mark in California. David believed they were buying a new house together in Phoenix. He had no idea she planned to walk away as soon as the money changed hands. David thinks the house will be for us here. He doesn't know I'm leaving, one email said. My son was being used as a tool, a disposable means to an end. The revelation should have brought some bitter satisfaction, but it only deepened the hollow feeling inside me. It was betrayal layered on betrayal. He was betraying me, and she was betraying him. Everyone using everyone else. It didn't change the fundamental truth. He had chosen this path. He had made deliberate decisions against me. The fact that he was also being manipulated did not excuse him. I photographed every page, every damning sentence. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. The folder in the same spot, oriented the same way, the papers between the same envelopes, the desktop as clean as before. I took one last slow walk through the house, really seeing it. I'd built this place 30 years earlier. Every corner was familiar. The kitchen where I'd taught David to scramble eggs, the living room where we'd watched games, the hallway with family photos still hanging, my wife's smile, David's degree, family vacations that now felt like someone else's memories, all poisoned by present betrayal. I left through the back door, cut through the neighbor's yard to my SUV, and drove back to the motel without checking the mirror. I turned the motel room into a war room, phone plugged into the laptop, transferring photos. Margaret's notebook open beside me. The case was almost complete now. Not just suspicions and observed meetings, but an entire architecture of proof, fake documents, emails, recordings, surveillance. I called Margaret from the car with a steadier voice than I felt. I've got everything. Documents, proof, the forgery. You went into the house, she asked, worried. It's my house, Margaret, my evidence. They're planning to sell it on July 18th. There was a silence. Then what's your next step? Stop reacting and start prosecuting, I said. That night I barely slept. I spent hours with the photos open on the laptop, the forged signature, the contracts, Laura's emails, the makeshift office David had carved out of my guest room. In my head, I shifted roles, from wounded father to plaintiff's attorney. I opened a legal pad and began lists, procedural steps, evidence to authenticate, professionals I needed to contact. This wasn't about feelings. It was a case, and I had spent 30 years winning cases with far weaker evidence than this. The next morning, I put on a suit for the first time since everything had begun. Navy blue, discreet tie, polished shoes. In the motel bathroom mirror, Judge Henry Lawson looked back at me again. Not the confused homeowner or devastated father. I slipped the evidence folder into my briefcase and drove downtown. First stop, the office of a notary I trusted, Rachel Chen, whom I knew from the courthouse. I swore out an affidavit stating, under penalty of perjury, that I had never granted power of attorney to David or to anyone to dispose of my property. You understand what this implies? She asked as she pressed the notary seal to the document. I'm counting on what it implies, I replied. The thump of the seal sounded like a judge's gavel. From there, I went to Desert View Bank. Thomas Burke, the branch manager, left his desk as soon as he saw me. Henry, I thought you were traveling. Change of plans. I need every attempt to move on my house or accounts frozen unless I'm physically present. I explained just enough. Attempted sale with forged documents. His expression hardened. He typed, checked screens. Done. Without your ID in front of us, not a cent moves, and no real estate transaction is authorized. He handed me a stamped confirmation. I'm sorry you're going through this. Thank you for acting so fast, I said. Second wall raised. Next, I booked an emergency appointment with a trust and estates attorney, Catherine Moore. I'd checked her credentials the night before, 15 years specializing in asset protection, spotless reputation. In her wood and leather office, I gave her a heavily trimmed version of the situation. A man wanting to protect his assets from potential family conflict. An irrevocable living trust is your best option, she said. It protects the property, avoids probate headaches, and you retain control as grantor and trustee. How long will it take? I asked. Can we draft and file it today with the county recorder? She typed quickly. What effective date do you want it to show? May 15th, I answered. She didn't ask why. It was my right. In 2 hours, we went through every clause. I remained in full control. The property moved into the trust. No one could dispose of the house without my signature as trustee. She handled the notarization herself and sent the filing electronically to the recorder's office. By 4 p.m, legally, my house belonged to an irrevocable trust created a month before the date on the supposed power of attorney. That meant something simple. Neither David nor anyone else could sell the house, even if the power of attorney were genuine, because they didn't own it. They had built their entire operation on ground they no longer had title to. I paid her fee, $3,500, gladly. Back at the motel, I spread everything out on the bed, sorted folders, copies, digital backups. I filled 5 main binders, one with photos and Margaret's notes, one with the fake documents and signature comparisons, one with the notarized affidavit denying any power of attorney, one with Margaret's written statement we drafted together, and a final one with all trust documentation. I copied everything onto USB drives, left one full set of papers in a safe deposit box at the bank, gave another to Margaret, and kept the third with me. Nothing was left to chance. The legal scaffolding is in place, I told Margaret on the phone that night. Trust recorded, bank locked down, forgeries documented. When will you confront them? She asked. On July 18th at the closing. Why wait so long? For maximum impact, I said. Let them walk in believing they've won and watch everything collapse in public. That's cold, Henry. No, Margaret, I answered. That's justice. 12 days later, on July 14th, I officially returned from my trip. My SUV rolled into the driveway at 2 p.m. The sun was just as merciless. The yard was watered, grass trimmed, everything outwardly normal, and yet I knew exactly what had been brewing inside those walls. I knew, and they didn't know that I knew. That imbalance of information was my last weapon. Through the windshield, I saw the curtain move. They knew I was home. I let the key rattle a little in the lock. I'm back, I called. The trip didn't go well. David appeared from the kitchen, his expression frozen for a heartbeat before he pasted on a smile. Dad, what a surprise. Everything okay? Behind him, Laura came down the stairs, calculating distances and time. 4 days earlier than they'd planned, closing was still set for Friday. They thought they still had room to maneuver. I set my suitcase down with a show of weariness. The altitude didn't agree with me. Headaches. I decided to come back early. That's a shame, Laura said with perfect plastic sympathy. but probably for the best. I let my eyes wander slowly around the living room, as if rediscovering my home. "It's good to be back," I said. I missed my own bed. They exchanged a glance, a blend of relief and recalculation. I excused myself, saying I needed to check the mail, and shut myself in my study for a moment. Everything looked as before. The scratched lock on the safe was the same metal scar. I ran a finger over the gouges, committing to memory every detail for the day I'd have to testify. Then I went back to the living room and let the afternoon settle around us as if nothing had changed. Dinner that night was psychological warfare. David launched his ambush wrapped in concern. "Dad, I've been meaning to say, you've seemed a little forgetful lately." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth, set it down carefully, and looked at him. "Forgetful? How so?" "Little things. Losing your keys, mixing up dates," he said. Laura leaned in to back him up. "It's natural at your age. Maybe you should see a doctor just for peace of mind." I slid my hand into my pocket and tapped my phone, starting the recorder. Every word was going to be preserved. "I suppose I have been a bit scattered," I said, letting my tone drift. The relief on David's face was immediate. "We just want you to be okay." I could see the narrative they were constructing, their future defense once the forgery surfaced. Poor confused old man doesn't remember signing anything. Dementia, cognitive decline. They were building their escape route. I let doubt cloud my features and touch my temple as if trying to recall something. "Do I really seem that disoriented?" I asked. "Not disoriented," Laura corrected quickly. "Just tired. You've been through a lot." The next day at lunch, she sprung the real trap. "Henry, do you remember those papers from last month?" "Papers?" I frowned as if searching my memory. "The legal documents. You signed a power of attorney so David could help you with your finances," she said lightly. My confusion in that moment was genuine. I had never signed such a thing. To them, my blank expression was confirmation. "I signed something? No, that doesn't ring a bell." David jumped in. "It's fine, Dad, don't worry about it. It was just routine paperwork." I gave a showy sigh of relief. "If you say so. Lately my memory isn't good for much." A flash of triumph crossed Laura's face before she managed to bury it. David relaxed. They thought they had planted enough doubt about my lucidity. They believed they were building an unassailable defense. In reality, every word was being recorded as proof that they knew the power of attorney was irregular and were already crafting a cover story. That night, walking past their bedroom, I heard their voices through the half-open door. "He doesn't even remember signing," David said, relieved. "Perfect," Laura answered. "If he complains, we talk about cognitive decline. Do you think he'll complain?" "He won't know anything until it's all done. 3 more days and we're free." I stood in the hallway shadow, recording it all. They were in their bed thinking they were safe. I was on the other side of the door, capturing every sentence. Later, in my study, I listened again with headphones, then backed up the audio to my computer, copied it to a USB drive, and emailed encrypted versions to Catherine with a clear subject line, "Evidence of fraudulent intent, July 14th to 15th. Her reply came quickly. "Recordings are crystal clear. Strong evidence of consciousness of guilt. See you Friday at 2 p.m. This will be decisive." I smiled without joy. They had no idea what was coming. For the next 3 days, I played my part to perfection, the confused old man. I asked Laura to repeat simple instructions. I took my time answering basic questions. I let myself lose the thread of conversations. I gave them exactly what they wanted to see, an inoffensive man, incapable of mounting a legal challenge. Each morning I watched their confidence grow. Each night I added their fresh lies to my file. On Friday, I put on my judge's suit, navy blue, Windsor knot perfectly centered, shoes shining. I packed my briefcase with the color-coded folders and went down to the kitchen. "I've got a few errands to run. I'll be back later," I said. They smiled, perfectly at ease, imagining I was headed to the bank or the grocery store. In 4 hours, at 2 in the afternoon, they would be sitting at a closing table, convinced they were about to sign away my house and receive $650,000. They didn't know I would be waiting there with the full weight of the law. Desert Sun Title and Trust occupied the second floor of a modern building on the north side of the city. From the hallway, I could see through the glass into the conference room. At 1:50, everyone was already there. Luke Carter sat at the head of the table arranging documents. David and Laura were to his left, dressed up and nervous. On the other side sat the buyer, Richard Torres, a Californian with carefully groomed gray hair and an expensive suit. At the far end, the trust officer, Sarah Martin, was sorting through her own stack of papers. It looked like any ordinary closing. I checked my watch. 2 o'clock sharp. Catherine stood beside me, briefcase in hand. "Ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for 2 weeks," I said. I opened the door. Conversation died instantly. Heads turned. I watched the color drain from David's face. Laura half rose before forcing herself back into her chair. Carter frowned. Torres's mouth tightened, annoyed at the interruption. Sarah's expression shifted to alert attentiveness. I walked to the empty end of the table without taking off my jacket and set my briefcase down with a click that echoed in the quiet room. "Good afternoon," I said, using the voice I had used hundreds of times to open court. "My name is Henry Lawson, and I am the rightful owner of the house you are trying to sell." "Henry, what are you doing here?" Laura burst out. I ignored her and spoke to Sarah. "This transaction cannot proceed. The power of attorney it relies on is a forgery." "Dad, this isn't—" David began. "Be quiet, David." I cut him off without looking his way. I opened the briefcase and pulled out the first folder, red tab. The sworn affidavit with Rachel's notary seal. I set it in front of Sarah. "Here you have my statement, under oath, that I have never granted any power of attorney to anyone to manage or sell my assets." Catherine slid a blue-tabbed folder across to her. "And here is the irrevocable living trust for the property, established on May 15th. Since that date, the only person authorized to contract regarding the house is Mr. Lawson as trustee. Any later document is ineffective." Sarah checked dates, seals, recorder stamps, then looked up at Carter. "Did you verify the existence of this trust before bringing this transaction in?" Carter went pale. The power of attorney appeared legitimate. I processed the sale on that basis. Torres sat up straighter, his expression icy. "You assured me everything was clean." Laura jumped in, trying to regain control. "This is a misunderstanding. Henry did sign, but he's confused. His memory—" I took my phone out. "Allow me to refresh everyone's memory. This recording is from 2 days ago." I tapped play. Laura's voice filled the room. "If he complains, we talk about cognitive decline." Then David, 3 more days and we're free." And again Laura, "Then we're free." I stopped the audio. Silence grew heavier. "Does that sound like people who believe they're acting on a valid power?" I asked. I opened the black-tabbed folder and spread photos across the table. The midnight meeting in my dining room, documents laid out, signatures, champagne, each image time-stamped. I opened my laptop and pulled up blown-up versions. "This is the meeting on July 2nd at 11:53 p.m. in my house, while you thought I was traveling. Here we see Mr. Carter reviewing documents taken from my forced file cabinet. Here we see David signing. Here is Laura handing him my red folder." Torres leaned forward, studying the images, then turned to Carter with open disgust. "This is fraud. I'm calling my attorney." "I relied on the documentation they provided," Carter stammered. "I didn't know you had this as well," I said, sliding out the green tabbed folder with the handwriting analysis, samples of my real signature alongside the one on the power of attorney. The differences were obvious: the pressure, the strokes, the shape of the loop. Sarah closed her own file with a sharp snap. "This transaction is halted. Under our regulations, I am required to report a suspected forgery to the authorities." Torres was already collecting his things. You can sell me another house after you get your license back, if you ever do. With this crowd, I'm done." He walked out. Laura pinned me with her eyes. "You can't do this. We're your family." I calmly repacked my folders. I spent 30 years imposing consequences on people who broke the law. "That doesn't change because you're my son or my daughter-in-law." David's voice cracked. "Dad, please, we can fix this." I looked at him with the same steady gaze I'd given countless defendants. "You stopped being my family the day you broke into my safe to steal from me. From today on, you're just another defendant." I left the room without looking back. Behind me, voices rose, accusations, panic. In the elevator, Catherine spoke softly. "That was devastating." "That was justice," I said. "And now we go to the police station to file a criminal complaint, then back to the bank to reinforce the blocks, and then home to change every lock." The doors opened and the desert sun hit me full in the face. For the first time in weeks, I took a deep breath. The house was still mine. The main battle was won. Consequences were next. At the Central Precinct of the Phoenix Police Department, an investigator named Mary Roberts took my statement. Catherine and I spread folders, audio files, and photos across her desk. She listened to the recordings with a deepening frown, examined the power of attorney, compared signatures, looked at the photos of the nighttime meeting. "Mr. Lawson, you're accusing your own son of fraud and forgery." "I'm reporting a crime," I replied. "The fact that the person committing it is my son is his choice, not mine." She took a breath, nodded, and began typing. Over the following week, the police summoned David and Laura separately. Under questioning, David eventually confessed, admitting he knew the power of attorney was fake. Laura denied everything until they showed her the emails to Mark in Los Angeles. Then she tried to blame it all on him. They began to sink by turning on each other. At the same time, Catherine filed a civil lawsuit seeking damages and compensation for $100,000. "You may never see that money," she warned me, "but the judgment will follow them." "That's what I want," I said. "A record." A civil judge, someone who had once been one of my clerks, handled the eviction proceeding. On July 29th, we had a 10-minute hearing. She granted the eviction. They had 10 days to vacate the property. On August 1st, I watched from my study window as movers loaded a truck. When they were nearly done, David came to the door. "Dad, please, give me another chance." I looked at him, the same man who had forced my cabinet and tried to sell my house behind my back. "You made choices, David. You didn't stumble into this. You planned it. I'm your son. You were my son," I said. "You chose to turn me into a victim." I closed the door, turned the deadbolt. That same day, I had every lock changed. The criminal case moved quickly. On August 28th, I put on a suit once more and went, this time as a member of the public, to the courthouse. After 30 years entering through the judge's entrance, I walked through the security arch, waited in line, and sat on a wooden bench. David and Laura sat at separate tables, each with their own attorney. Neither of them looked my way. Judge Michael Harris read aloud parts of the victim impact statement I had submitted. "For 3 decades, I upheld the law from this bench," my words said. "They forced my safe, forged my signature, and tried to strip me of the house I gave them a home in. The blood tie does not lessen the gravity of what they did. It increases it." The courtroom was utterly silent. Harris pronounced sentence. David, 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, a $15,000 fine, and $50,000 in restitution. Laura, 2 years probation, 300 hours of service, a $25,000 fine, $50,000 in restitution, and 5 years barred from working in real estate. The gavel came down. I stood and walked out without looking at either of them. On the courthouse steps, Margaret was waiting. "Justice won," she said. "As it always should," I answered. "Sometimes it just needs a little push." "What will you do now?" she asked. "Offer free legal advice to seniors. Teach them how to protect themselves. Make sure no one else on our street goes through this." I drove home along the same roads that had been the backdrop to each chapter of this story. The bank, the notary's office, the title company, the police station. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel. 30 years on the bench, and I had never imagined I would one day see my son at the defense table. He'd had an education, support, a daily example of integrity. He chose greed. I chose justice. That was the difference. Some parents would have forgiven him, would have put the relationship above everything else. I couldn't. To do that would have been to accept being a victim, and I hadn't spent half my life confronting criminals just to become one of their willing casualties. I went inside. The new locks clicked cleanly behind me. The house was quiet, entirely mine again. Losing my son hurt. It will hurt as long as I live. But I kept something I refused to sacrifice. My dignity, my home, my respect for myself. Justice isn't always kind, but it is almost always right. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started searching for legal aid programs for older adults. Turning pain into purpose, betrayal into protection for others. They had tried everything to make me a victim. I refused. That refusal was the real victory. Some bonds are sacred, some betrayals are unforgivable, and that's okay. The house was calm, safe, defended. It was my home again. If this story gripped you, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what you felt while you were listening. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, click on the box to the left.